It's the Book Club for Kids.
The Book Club for Kids. It's the Book Club for Kids podcast.
Hi, I'm Kitty Felde. Did you ever wonder what kids in other countries are reading? Well, this week we talk with a trio of readers from Canada about a book by a Canadian author. The novel is called Flickers, and it's the story about the birth of motion pictures back in the days before movies could talk.
So it's kind of like a book with videos.
That's one of our readers from Gilbert Paterson Middle School in the town of Lethbridge. The book starts out in Lethbridge, Ontario.
A massive snowstorm shrouded the countryside. The old rancher, Ernest Thorne, had to perform the delivery as there was no way to plow through the 20 miles of swirling snow and drifts to Lethbridge.
That's our celebrity reader, actor, writer, and game show host, Gavin Crawford. Writer Arthur Slade takes his characters from Lethbridge to Hollywood.
And I wanted to write about how the change of going from silent films to talkies really changed Hollywood.
This is the Book Club for Kids, the podcast where kids talk about books. We'll tell you how you can be on the show a little later on, but first, let's meet our readers. Oh, and spoiler alert, our discussion includes a surprising plot point, so you might want to read the book if you don't want to spoil the surprise.
Hello, my name is Ezra. Hello, my name is Karis.
Hello, my name's Essex, and we're all in grade 7 at Gilbert Paterson Middle School in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada.
So our book is called Flickers by Arthur Slade. What's it about, Kiris?
It's about two twin girls. One is a movie star, and she was born perfectly, and the other one was born kind of not deformed, but different. She was covered in birthmarks, and her head was misshapen.
Let's hear a bit from the early part of the book that describes the birth of the girls. Our celebrity reader is a Canadian actor, writer, comedian, and game show host, Gavin Crawford.
"What will we call her?" Ernest asked. "Isabel," his wife answered without hesitation. It had been her mother's name, and it suited the baby. She was destined to be a belle of the prairies. Ernest wondered how he deserved to have such grace in his life. Not once, but twice. The first time was 10 years ago when his wife had chosen him in spite of being so much older than her, and even though so many other men had asked for her hand in marriage. And now, here was an angel wriggling before them. After such a long wait, there would now be 3 thorns to till the soil. And maybe even a boy next. He patted his wife's hand again and smiled. She opened her mouth to speak, but instead screamed, a hard and terrible scream. Ernest quickly laid Isabel in the waiting bassinet. His daughter mewed and reached for him, her cries hitting a higher and higher pitch, but he left her there. "What's happening?" he asked Abigail. "What's wrong?" "Another child," she said. "There's another child, a twin." And then Abigail screamed again, the tendons on her neck sticking out. She gritted her teeth, grabbed the edges of the table, and breathed madly like a horse with a broken leg. "Dear God," she said. The crown of the infant was showing. Ernest had pulled hundreds of calves into this world, and he knew the baby would suffocate if he delayed a moment longer. So he helped in his own rough way, sweat forming on his forehead. Then with one more short scream from his wife, the infant was free and squirming in his hands. The rancher held it up. Another daughter, heavier than the first and more solid. Her skin was a patchwork of purple and white, the umbilical cord tight around her neck. He loosened the cord, and she began sucking in wet breaths. She made no other noise, just looked up at him with eyes as brown as his own. The girl was so unlike her sister that it shocked him. He'd seen calves born hairless, their skin a human peak, their goggling eyes odd and far too large. She was as wretched as those calves, her skull misshapen, perhaps by the force he'd applied when he'd pulled her. Her naked body was covered with brown spots, dozens of birthmarks on her arms, legs, chest, and face. It's another daughter. And then a moment later he added, Abigail? His wife was still. Her chest did not rise. He knew, in his gut, she was dead. Her heart had given out, bringing their second daughter into the world. The twin didn't look as though she belonged here. It was as if he'd wrenched her from some other place.
And their mother died during birth and their father died later on, so they move in with their uncle, and the pretty sister goes on to be a sort of actress, and she's very famous and does a lot of movies, and the other one has to stay in the mansion that they live in.
Well, Ezra, tell us why the title is Flickers.
The title is Flickers because in like the time where it's set, which is like in the 1920s, that's what they called movies around that time, is they called them flickers. And since the sister is a movie star and the whole theme is like older movies, they called it Flickers.
Essex, how would you describe this book?
It kind of starts off historical. We're talking about cinema in the 1920s and the first movie with sound. And then later it gets into like a horror sort of vibe. It's pretty creepy.
Well, describe it. What makes it creepy?
There's this dude, he's like a big movie director, and he's the one making the first sound movie, but he is not a person.
He's not a person. Well, curious, what is he?
He's secretly an insect man, and it's big plot twist.
Yeah, he like eats people in a non-cannibalistic way.
Yeah, well, there's insects sort of play a large part in this. Describe the scorpion hornets.
So basically, they're like the Minions. They're like the Minions a little bit, but not in Despicable Me in the Flickers, because Mr. Seal controls them. Mr. Seal is the movie producer, by the way. They're just scorpion hornets, and they kind of suck. They kind of killed some people, which isn't great. But, yeah, and so they're like his henchmen.
So we have the twins who are sort of at the heart of our story, and they sort of have a weird relationship with each other in that they can kind of read each other's thoughts. Do you guys know twins? Is this a true thing?
My aunts are twins, and I don't think they can read each other's minds.
I don't think that's a kind of twin genetic thing, not gonna lie.
If they can't read minds, is there something else you can perceive that makes them different than us singletons?
Well, if there's a set of identical twins, now I'm going to get very sciencey here, then they're going to have a lot of similar genes, maybe not all the same, but largely the same, which could mean some things not involved with how you look could be the same too, maybe?
I think it's mainly just to make it like a funnier bit, and so it like helps the plot flow a bit better.
Well, it comes back later on too.
Yeah, it comes back quite often, but I think
The big movie.
the movie finale, but with like the cream puffs and stuff, where she was like, cream puffs, like, Isabel, come here, I want cream puffs, so that she would like talk to her.
Have you been successful at all in doing mind transfer to somebody else, trying to get somebody else to respond to your thoughts?
No. I mean, I barely respond to people like with messaging and stuff, let alone telepathically.
Rats! Sometimes I wish they would. Sometimes I wish they would respond. There's a great line in this book about imagination is the membrane between the multitude of realities. What does that mean?
I don't think it was written to mean anything in particular. I think it was more written to be an open interpretation for whomever may want to make that effort.
Yeah, I really liked there was a part in it where they were talking to Mr. Cecil, and he said something about how the imagination is like man's greatest weapon. That was a really good line, I think.
Yeah. The whole point of like him being like an insect man on Earth is because of imagination, basically. So I think they mainly just put a lot of imagination lines in there, so like kids who read it feel like, oh yeah, like I could think of anything I want.
Well, it seems like the one thing that Mr. Cecil really wants to do is to harness. I mean, I think that's his line is, what if imagination could be harnessed? What would that look like if we could all harness imagination, or if we had evil intentions or good intentions? What would that be like?
If people could really harness their imagination a lot more, I feel like technology would be a lot farther along than it is right now, because people have more ideas and they can think of more things to do, things they might not have thought of in like the first time.
Well, why do you think we don't follow through with our ideas then?
I have a strong opinion on this, not gonna lie. So I think a lot of people don't go through on their ideas because of some like societal expectations around them. So some people are like, no, that's like a stupid idea, don't do it. So you don't actually go through with it and see if it was in fact a good idea or if it was just pointless. So you don't go through the experience of it.
Is there anything you've had a really great idea about that you wish you had acted on?
That becomes a really hard question because as humans have so much brain power and imagination, I've had so many ideas, so many random thoughts, like, what if this was a thing? Probably won't ever happen, but who knows?
As a child, you're told not to do things more often, so you don't go through with imagination.
Well, do you think that we're braver than when we're younger and we just get more timid as we get older?
When you're birds, you're like, oh yeah, like I can do anything I want, like the world is my blank canvas. And then as you get older, people are like, no, like that's wrong, like don't do that, like you can't do that. And so many people have so many different opinions on everything that you get so many people telling you no to do like certain things, like no, like don't do that, or yeah, do that.
So let's talk a little bit about the movie making. Are you guys familiar at all with the early days of movie making?
The furthest back of movies I can think of are like, people always talk about old Western movies, but that's still not like 1920s old, so not really.
I have watched a movie from the 1920s, and I'm not gonna lie to you, they're odd. They're a little weird. The like movie making itself was kind of different, and like how their acting's kind of different and stuff. Just everything about it's different, and it's like kind of interesting.
From the ones that I remember, there would be a video, and then maybe music in the background, and then there would be a screen that's like just black, and it had words on it. That's kind of what the characters were saying. So it's kind of like a book with videos.
What struck you the most about this book? What's the one thing that stuck in your mind more than anything else?
What I like the most is the fact that it starts off in Lethbridge, where we live, in like the late 1800s, early 1900s. And at this point, Lethbridge is like small farming sort of place, maybe 800 people at most.
And what's it like today?
A lot more, like 100,000 people. So not super big in the grand scheme of things, but fair size. But I just found it interesting that this author chose to bring the start of the story here to Lethbridge, even if it was just for a single chapter.
Please keep in mind I read this first when I was 7 and had a horrendous fear of bugs, but mine was the fact of that one scene of her being in his house and finding out he's a bug man. That stuck with me when I slept.
And how scary can you get in books for kids your age and younger?
I think the brand of scariness and horror that they're using isn't really based on like blood and guts and gore, and more like psychological horror. So I think that's could be better or worse for younger people.
I was wondering if that's more scary or not. You know, the fact that you aren't actually seeing blood and guts splashed across the page, is that the psychological kind? Is that actually scarier in the long run?
I think that's just depends on who you are.
Yeah, I'd say it depends on who you are because it depends on your sensitivity levels to it. Like, I have some friends who are really sensitive to horror things, and I have some friends that really aren't sensitive to it.
Sounds like a good time to talk to our author. You guys got some questions for Arthur Slade?
Why did you choose Lethbridge, Alberta? What was your reasoning for that?
I actually grew up near there. I grew up in Saskatchewan, and so I wanted to be in a place similar to where I grew up. But I also, Lethbridge kind of feels like it's in the middle of nowhere in a way. Even though I don't mean any insult to anybody in Lethbridge, but it's just a place it's close to the States, but it's not near Calgary, which people have heard of, and so it makes it a bit more mysterious then.
How did you come up with something like this? Because I've definitely never read anything similar to it before.
I had an interest in old black and white movies. I just thought that was, the whole idea of black and white movies and them becoming sound and how that changed the whole industry was really interesting to me. That's part of it, but the other part of it is I didn't really use that interest until I just got that kind of image of the girls being born, of having that as the very start. And going, where are they going to end up? And well, they have to end up in Hollywood. They have to come from this small place that nobody knows about and end up in Hollywood. And so that's where I kind of start combining those two ideas together. So I wanted to write about Hollywood, and I wanted to write about how the change of going from silent films to talkies really changed Hollywood. Like, lots of actors couldn't get work anymore because they're so used to just, making big faces and that sort of thing. And it turns out they didn't have very nice voices. And so suddenly they didn't have jobs. And I just thought that's such a big change. I wanted to write about that. But of course it starts earlier, right? Because when the kids are born. And I also wanted to kind of write about the whole kind of pioneering kind of spirit, just for the first few chapters.
Why did you choose the names that you chose?
I chose the name Beatrice because I just like it. It's a name from that doesn't get used so much anymore, but it's from the past, and so it really spoke of that time period. And Isabel is just because it's a musical name. And also I have a friend who has since passed away I think she was 97. Her name was Isabel, and so I just kind of the whole idea that kind of carrying on her name was important too. Mr. Cecil is his Cecil DeMille was one of the famous producers and directors, and so I wanted to use that name to make people think about the past back then, and so that's where the main names came from. I think Uncle Wayne was just I just wanted to find a name from kind of that seemed normal, really.
All right, now I'm coming to the hardest part, which is asking you guys what's the name of your very favorite book and why do you like it?
Well, I'll start off with saying it's not this. This was pretty good. This was really good, but not my favorite. I've been reading a book series for my language arts teacher, The Reckoners. It's very good. It follows, this kid named Dave, well, not a kid, 18-year-old person named David. And he's in this, post-apocalyptic Earth where a bunch of people have been turned into superheroes, but they're not really superheroes. They become villains because they have so much power over everyone else. I find that the most interesting thing about it is the different epic weaknesses and powers that they have. I find that very cool, just thinking about how those would work and the caveats to those. That's what I find most interesting.
I've read the Percy Jackson series. That was pretty good. But last year in English, so language arts, we were doing these group reading projects, and the book I got assigned to was called The Seventh Most Important Thing. And it was really interesting, not something that I would usually read, but I ended up really enjoying it. This kid throws a brick at an old man, and his punishment is he has to collect these items for this old man, and it's really interesting, and I don't know why it stuck with me so much. I just like it because there was no real reason to collect these items other than this art piece.
The Swallow by Karis Cotter. It's a book about, again, two girls. One of them can see ghosts, and one of them wants to see ghosts. And the girls are basically just polar opposites. One of them has a massive family, and that's a whole bunch of foster kids and stuff. And the other one basically lives alone with a butler named Kendrick. which sounds lovely. And they meet one day through their really thin attic walls. And Rose thinks Polly's a ghost, and Polly thinks Rose is a ghost. And so they meet up at the cemetery, because that's what you do. And they find a grave with Rose's name on it in the cemetery. And so they try to discover whether Rose is actually a ghost. And then there's a big plot twist at the end, which is really, really sad.
Well, what about you, Arthur Slade? What's your favorite book?
I'm going to say The Hobbit, and which, of course, by J.R.R. Tolkien. And the reason I love it is because my teacher, Mr. Hildebrand, he read it to us when I was in grade 4. And I don't remember reading fantasy novels before that. But I was just amazed that you could go to this world where there were hobbits and there were elves and dwarves and they were running away from spiders and all these amazing adventures. There's a dragon that talked and he was just so frightening, but he was so cool. And all those things, I just feel like my mind was just suddenly exploding with joy. and so when I think about The Hobbit, it's just a really happy feeling for me, because that's where I think my love of writing, my love of reading, and just of stories really came from that.
Gavin Crawford, do you have a favorite book?
One of my favorite books, or really a series of books, is the Shades of Magic series by V.E. Schwab. The first book is A Darker Shade of Magic, and it's about a magician that can travel between 3 different parallel Londons. One that has no magic, one that has some magic, and one that has way too much magic. It has everything I like. There's a crafty thief, there's pirates, there's princes, there's magicians, and there's some really bad guys. It's one of the best series of books I've read probably in the last 10 years. I really like it.
Got a favorite book? Well, you can be on the Book Club for Kids podcast, too. Just record yourself on the voice memo app of a smartphone, telling us your first name, the city where you live, the name of your favorite book, and why you love it. And email the audio file to us at kitty@bookclubforkids.org. And if you're a teacher or a librarian in the Southern California area, and you'd like Book Club for Kids to come out and tape an episode with your readers, well, just drop us a line. It's free, and we are booking episodes for this school year. Just email us for information at kitty@bookclubforkids.org. Thanks this week to producer Chad Francis, with a technical assist from across the border from Nick Collier at Lethbridge Community College. Brandon Baker composed our theme with additional music from Charles Nillman. Emma Steinkellner designed our logo. Thanks to our writer, Arthur Slade, and celebrity reader, Gavin Crawford. And thanks to our readers this week, Ezra, Karis, and Essex. And thanks to their Learning Commons facilitator, Victoria Nesterowitz. We have a free newsletter for teachers, parents, and librarians full of free tips about how to turn kids into lifelong readers. You can sign up at our website, bookclubforkids.org. And if you're looking for a way to introduce civics in the elementary classroom, check out our other free podcast, The Fina Mendoza Mysteries. There are free teacher's guides, a blog about facts behind the fiction, and books that inspired the podcast called State of the Union and Welcome to Washington, Fina Mendoza. We'll have a link at the show notes. The story's about the 10-year-old daughter of a congressman who solves mysteries inside the U.S. Capitol and teaches us a few things about civics along the way. I'm Kitty Felde. Thanks again for listening.